In this video, we'll build this cool and amazing password strength checker to improve our HTML, CSS, and DOM manipulation skills with JavaScript. Let's get right into it. To get started, let's create our HTML file, which we would call index.html. Having created our HTML file, we would generate our boilerplate code by pressing Shift and 1. You hit enter. Change our title text to password strength checker. In the body of our HTML, we'll create a div with a class container. And inside our container, we'll create a div with a class password checker. Now, in our password checker div, we'll create an h1 tag and we'll give it a class of heading. The text in our h1 tag would be password strength checker. Good. Right beneath our h1 tag, we would create another div with a class input box. Inside our input box div, we'll create an input element with a type text, with a type password. We'll not give it a name for now, so let's delete that and we'll give it an ID of password. We'll also pass in the attribute required and give it a placeholder. For the placeholder, we'll give it a text, enter your password. Right beneath our input, we'll create a button. And our button text would be submit. For the type of the button, we'll set it to submit as well. Good. Finally, beneath our input box, we would create a paragraph with the class message. This paragraph would display our message to the user. We also give it an ID of message. Good. Inside our paragraph tag, we would put the text password strength is, and we'll bring a span here. We'll be using JavaScript to display the strength of the password. So for now, we will not put anything in our span elements. Good. Now we can simply run this with live server. You open with live server and we have it there, password checker. So let's move on to style our password strength checker. To do that, we would create our styles.css file and link it to our HTML file. Right beneath the title tag, we'll type link and we'll select CSS from beneath. Boom. Our styles.css file has been linked to our HTML successfully. Now, let's begin by styling our page. The first thing we'll do is use the universal selector and we'll set every margin to 0, as well as every padding to 0. We also give the box sizing property border box. Finally, our font family for this project would be Verdana. Great. We can see the change in font. This is much more pretty than the initial one. The first element we will style in our styles.css will be our container class. For our container class, we want it to fill our entire screen and center everything in our container class in the middle of our page. In order to achieve that, we would give it a width of 100%, a height of 100 viewport height, and let's give our container class a background so that we can see what's going on. For the background color, we would use 5A. It's a purple color, so we use 5A 0636. That's the code for our background color. Beautiful, just like this. Now, to center everything in our container class in the middle of our page, we have to give it a display of flex, align items, center, and justify content, center. Boom, just like that. Let's check out our page in the browser. Okay, this looks good, except we don't want this password strength to be here. Rather, we want it beneath the input. So we have to check our HTML to see that we placed it in the right place. Okay, so there was an error here. To move the paragraph text up into the password checker div, you just simply hit Alt plus the up arrow key, and there you have it. It's a shortcut you can use in VS Code. So we fixed that, and then the next thing we want to style would be our password checker div, this div right here. So we'll copy it, move into our CSS, and we'll paste it over there. You can type it out as well. The first thing we'll do with our password checker class is we'll give it a width of 600 pixels, and we want the background to be white. Also, let's set the height to max content. This simply means that the height would fill up as much space as their content, right? So it's not a fixed height. If we add more content to our password checker div, the height would increase. Moving on, the next thing we'll style is our header, our h1 tag, which I gave a class of heading. For that, we want to give it a text align center, and we want to set the margin on top and at the bottom to be 16 pixels. However, for the left and right, we don't need any margin over there, so we'll leave it as 0. Having done that, we'll now style our input box. And with the input box, we'll give it a width of 400 pixels. We will display flex and align item center. Also, give it a justify content center just to center everything in our display, right? The reason we are giving it a width of 400 pixels is we'll set our input to width 100%. So let's start our input element, this particular element. First thing we know is that it is in our input box, so we can do it this way. We'll give it a width of 100% and a height of 40 pixels. Now, when we click on our input box, we see this outline here. We don't want that outline, so in our CSS, we'll give it an outline of none. And also, let's start the border to have 1 pixel we use solid, and the color will be ADAD. We'll gray it out. For our input box, now we want to space this out a bit, right? We want to space it out a bit. So for our input box, let's give it a margin, right? We can center our input box. I want it right in the center here, so let's give it a background color. Let's say red, so we can see what we are working with. Okay, so it begins from here all the way to here. So because it has a specified width, we can use the margin auto to center it. We'll give the top to have 0 and we'll set it to auto. That will center it exactly. The reason why this works, this margin 0 for the top and down, and for the horizontal axis auto centers it, is because we have the width set to a specified length. So having done that, we can then give this a border radius of about 5 pixels, just so we can round off the corners over here. Beautiful. Plus, we want to create some spacing between this. They are too close, and one of the ways we can do that is to use the gap. It's a plus we want to space out this input element and the submit button, and one of the ways we can do that is to use the gap property for every flex item in CSS. We'll set the gap to 16 pixels, and we'll have a gap between our input and our submit button right there. So that will be it for our input box. Let's now move on to our input element itself again. One of the things we want to do is to have some padding around this, right? This element here, you can see that our text is too close to the outline or the border of our input element. So to do that, we would simply give it a padding here of 8 pixels and 16 pixels. Boom. That will give it some nice spacing over here. I think it's really cool for now. We can't really see the text because it is set to password. So if we move into the index.html and you change it from password to, let's say, text, and you move, you can clearly see that our text is beautifully spaced out in our index. You can see that our text is beautifully spaced out in the element. So let's change this back to password. Okay, so we styled our password successfully. The next thing we style is our button. So input box, and we'll select it. Good. For our button, let's give it a height of 40 pixels. Remember, we gave our input box a height of 40 pixels as well. Then we'll give it a padding of 8 pixels on the y-axis and 16 pixels on the horizontal axis. Good. I think our button is beginning to look good. Let's give it a font size of 1 rem. We'll also set the border radius to 5 pixels. That will just round it a little bit. Now, we don't want any outline, so we'll set the outline to none. as well as for the border, we'll set the border to none because we don't want any border on our button. Having done that, let's set the color of the text to white, and we will give it a background color just like our container class background color. Boom, it's much more visible now. Let's take out this red color here by taking away this line of code. I forgot, so good. I think we are looking good. As of now, we are looking good. The last thing to style will be our message class, our message div right here. So if you have forgotten, we gave it a class of message. So we'll copy that right here and we'll move into our CSS, paste it, and begin styling it. First thing we'll do is give it a width, and we want the width to be max content, right? We don't want to give it a specified length because we would be using JavaScript to input some text after the phrase is, okay? So give it width of max content and we'll display none. That means that we don't want it to be showing, right? But before we do that, let's comment that out and we'll give it a margin bottom of 16 pixels. That will introduce some space beneath the paragraph here. In fact, let's do it margin of 16 pixels and would set the horizontal axis to 0. I think that's nice. Or let's make it auto rather, so that it can center it. Beautiful. I think this is nice. So we are done with styling our password strength checker. Let's look at it in our browser. I think this is very beautiful, very beautiful. Before we move on, let's comment out that line of code. Boom, so it doesn't display. Having seen this, let's go back to our input box, right? Let's give it a margin bottom of 16 pixels because that looks weird. Now it looks better. Good. All right, so we'll have to create our functionality with JavaScript. Let's now go ahead and create our JavaScript file. We'll call it script.js. Hit enter, and let's link our JavaScript file to our index.html. Right beneath our CSS link, we'll type script and select the one with SRC. Boom. Now, very key thing to note is to always bring the defer attribute if we are importing our JavaScript at the top. This helps our page runs much smoother and will not encounter any errors. In our JavaScript file, we would want to select 3 things from our HTML file. The first one being the input element here, and the second one being this input. In our JavaScript file, we would want to select 3 elements from our HTML. The first one would be our input over here, which has an ID of password. The second element we'd want to select is this entire paragraph tag, right? Which also has an ID of message. Finally, the third thing we would want to select is the span in our paragraph text. So let's head over and do that. Good. So we are done selecting the 3 elements we'll need. We will then set an event listener on our password, our input element, which has an ID of password. So we'll do password add event listener. The event we want to add is key up, which means anytime the user presses a key, we want this function to be called. We'll use an arrow function in here for the second argument. In our arrow function, we want to check 2 things, right? The first thing we want to check is if our password dot value dot length, the length of our password is greater than 0, then we would certainly want to give our message paragraph, right? We want to set the style to, so in our function, we want to check first of all if our password length, the value of our password object, we want to check if the value of our input element is greater than 0. If we do, then we'll set the display on our message box to block. We'll see how that works in a moment. Block. So let's pass in a key here and boom, right? So anytime we type something in, we would get a feedback, and when we close it, we won't see anything. The password here is still showing because we don't have an else over here, right? So else, let's set the message back to none. Good. So let's try that again. Boom. When we close it, it is none, right? So this block of code would consistently check if there is anything in our input. If it is not, it will change the display accordingly. Finally, we would want to output a message for the length of the password. Now, if our password the value dot length is less than 4, then that's a weak password. What we want to do is that we want to first of all set the text in our password string to weak, right? We also set the color to red. So let's do this. Boom, just like that, right? And we also want to color this input. Let's give it a border of red. Let's set the password dot style dot border equals. So this is how you can manipulate the styles using JavaScript, right? And when we do that, let's try it again. Boom, it's looking beautiful, very beautiful. Let's finish that up by specifying what we want to do if password length is greater than 4 but less than 8. For that, let's copy everything over here so we don't have to type it out again. I'll paste it here and do a few changes. We'll change medium, we'll change weak to medium, and then we'll change the colors to blue. Also, finally, for a strong password, which would be greater than 8 characters, we want to copy here again, right? We'll set the condition later on, and we'll change the color. We'll change, first of all, the text to strong and the color to green. Also, for the border color, we'll change it to green. And our condition would be, let's copy this, right? Control C. Let's paste this here, and we'll change it to greater than 8. So we are done. Let's now go into our browser and see how it works. So if we enter a text, 2 text, it shows that our password is weak. If we increase this to 5 text, we see that it's a medium password, and anything greater than 8 is strong. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy coding!